Alright, so without further ado, let's listen to some of our talks here. Let me introduce Professor Eugene. He's the head of visual performing arts from NIE. He has published widely. Maybe I should leave him to introduce himself, and then he will talk about music of the Singapore community.
Thank you. Very good morning, everyone. I'd better catch your attention. I shall be quick and I shall be gone. There are plenty of visual slides. There are no audio slides or video slides this morning, for good measure and for good reason. That's primarily because I've secured permission from people I've been in contact with to share with you the things that they've done on behalf of the community that represents Singapore. I'm also very grateful that we are talking about the Singapore community and not the Singaporean community, which is to me a very important thing. Small bit of detail, you know that 1 in every 4 among us is not Singaporean or PR, and that has very strong meaning for what it means to have a community in Singapore. If there's anyone here from NAC, finally I have a chance to meet you after 2005. Thank you for believing in something that happened quite a long time ago. I began with Mr. Pan Min Yen then, who's not with us today, but we had no map. We had no map to begin with because we were looking for communities of practice. When I finally submitted the technical report to NAC in 2005, I found 23, and I can tell you that number is growing. So 23s. And so any discussion of music for me and for us needs to be prefaced by what definitions of music are, connotatively and denotatively. We know what it denotes. And of course, you know, I couldn't help walking up the esplanade and discover that BMW is now the new sponsor for Lifestyle in 2013. So lifestyle and art as defined by, you know what I mean. If any of you are interested in the boring 550 pages that Ling Yen and I put together, it's there on a PDF. It's available on the NIE website. Do have a look. I believe the National Library Board online has also got a version of it. But, and this is a big but, if this had been a project just about Pan Min Yen and myself, well, the job was done. And the job could have died, you know, to have been preserved, encrypted, become a mausoleum, if you like, of the way in which we look at communities. So I asked myself, what can we know about communities? What do we know about these communities beyond what we've already done? And how can we continue to stay connected? Because, you know, tradition is a very dangerous word. It assumes that things are set in stone, and therefore there is a sort of a blind obeisance to it. So this presentation records some strategies that encourage or have been looking at ways to engage in the continuity. School music textbooks, the most unlikeliest of places, and yet they are the most powerful ways in which they become part of an understanding of school structures and the ways in which curricula is lived and living and continues to live. Teacher preparation courses, as you know, I work at the National Institute of Education. I look after art, music and drama, and of course, thankfully I've got a colleague in drama as well. And if we are going to talk about education as relevant and accessible in the 21st century, what should we be doing with curricula in our teacher preparation courses? Finally, it's one thing to tell people what to do. It's quite another thing for people to want to continue that task. And so these are the 3 strategies that I'm just going to highlight to you. Don't worry, I've acknowledged all the names. Well, if you find any of these, it doesn't matter if you find them in popular or second-hand bookstores or people want to get rid of it. It's still there, if you like. And in there, in primary 5, we do talk about anime. We do talk about Schoolhouse Rocks, of course, which is now dated, and a number of other things that we've come into contact with. In secondary school, we introduced Signal, we've introduced Bhangra, we've talked about music of film, P. Ramlee film, Collywood particularly, and of course Dick Lee, and a whole host of other things in there, including reggae and the blues. I'm not the only person to have done this with Peter Stead. My colleague Larry Francis, his wife, and Professor Lam Chi Hu, who is leaning on the pillar there for support. You see, the title of his book is more relevant than mine. It's called Music Alive. And of course, he's dealt with communities of practice within a curricula for the secondary school. Okay, teacher preparation courses. If you recognize these faces, good for you. If you don't, well, this is the study of the Keroncong musical practice in Singapore. I didn't get in touch with, but this particular student, Nur Atika, with the yellow scarf, I think, yeah, okay, did this for her ethnomusicology project in her final year, and getting into the practice of Keroncong in Singapore through an exemplar, Di Temasek, which is a local ensemble. Chua Yifang, who now teaches at ACS Independent, she looked at the Metro Philharmonic Chorus. Now, here's a priceless image, 1963. I don't know if that was the late Mr. Leong Yun Pin or someone else, but you know, that was the chorus. What did she find out? Okay, because I can flash you names, and then you probably think, yeah, right, you know, someone else filled in the details. This is what she found out from her study of it. So it's not just about studying it for the sake of studying it. It's studying it with a view to understand what continuity means in this particular context. This paper was presented at the ISME conference that my colleague Siu Ling was talking about earlier, the International Society for Music Educators. Something which she had to survive peer review to get into. And I'm talking about Beijing. I'm talking about well over 1,000 people who actually compete to get their presentations in. She'd done an earlier paper on, okay, she called it the Singaporean Chinese community because, well, if you take a look at the things that she was talking about, she was looking at a group, just right, okay, there you go. This is as close as you get to a community center in Heartlands. They are learning something about themselves. Okay, and I'll just flash this back so that you know you faces to the tasks. Informal learning practices, social interaction and music learning, karaoke singing as a tool that facilitates sustained learning through music, multi-pronged approach to teaching and learning of music. So almost immediately the pedagogical implications for the imbibement, the sensory imbibement of a practice. And so she found out that the long-term participation, learning language skills, maybe some of them were dialect speakers. For the first time now, karaoke enabled them to be immersed in Mandarin. And, oh my goodness, developing self-confidence through performing. These days we need somebody who's got talent, X factor, and so on and so forth. Well, you don't need to get up to that levels of embarrassment. You can just do this in your community clubs, community centers. Lin Ko, and I placed her here. Now, this is the Cultural Diversity Conference for which, again, was peer reviewed and which was accepted to be presented in Sydney. Recognize the space? It's a couple of floors below us, isn't it? Yeah? Okay, it's a bit empty right now, but I realize the biker clubs have now joined in, the BMX club, and so on and so forth. Yeah, but that's their school. That's where learning takes place, and that's where teaching takes place. Another young gentleman, now special mention, he came into our music program as a rock guitarist. He actually auditioned with a piece by Metallica, arranged for acoustic guitar. Strange, it was called Nothing Else Really Matters. So if you don't know, you know, right? And in his final year, this is a paper he presented at an international conference on popular culture and education in Hong Kong. This is what he had to say. Because here's an informally trained rock guitarist having to learn classical guitar while he was with us on the program, among other things as well. The last line, I think, is the one that's fairly crucial. Music educators must be the agent of change in adopting a change in pedagogical approaches. Alissa Pan, again, she was also successful, but she was successful by then as a serving teacher. She looked at the aspects of virtuosity. Now, of course, we tend to think of virtuosity as pyrotechniques, the Usain Bolts of the keyboard or the violin, and so on and so forth. She deconstructed the word virtuosity to mean vir, self, authentication of self, which is what every jazz practitioner knows. It's not how high the moon is played, it's how you play it. You know, there's a famous restaurant in the US I remember going to see. We don't sell burgers, we sell the sizzle. And so you know what virtuosity means in this context. Okay, sorry, this is some shameless self-advertisement, but it tells you my own obsession with looking for communities of practice. Chihu and I had this published in Ashgate last year. That was a little obsession of mine as well, because I've been always interested in the production of space, so Vedic metal and urban soundscape. Vedic metal here is in reference to a death metal group I've been researching for the last 10 years. Did you know they've been in Bay Beats for a couple of years at the festival? And they've also done Kala Utsavam twice. Now, what a death metal group is doing at a classical Indian festival, you tell me. Quite fascinating way in which they relive pre-Hindu culture. Okay, with Professor Chia, because I am not a Mandarin speaker, I shall try that in my next life. Professor Chia was most instrumental in offering me advice on a study of a young gentleman who you know now as Dr. Liang Wenfu. And of course, fortunately, this arrived at the time just before he got his cultural medallion, so that was a nice present for him. Okay, there's the Wind Band Ensemble in Singapore, and of course something that I became interested in, musical practices of South Indian film. Okay, I'm just going to give you a little bit more detail and then I'm going to stop there, but there's a reason I've held off one name and you'll find out why. This is something that I was invited to do last year. Now, you know why the Singapore Police Force says they celebrated their 80th anniversary, I think, in 2008. This was the second Strait Settlement Police Band. My obsession is, where was the first? And I'm still looking for it. If any of you have any information, let me know. Okay? The band was such a powerful instrument that in 1942, it was renamed the Sionan Police Band, playing in Waterloo Street. Gosh, if you look at Waterloo Street today and you look at Waterloo Street in 1942, you have a very different thing. Now, look who's on that list. There's only one name you might recognize. That's 1958. These are the people that through the whole there is Professor Ho Wee Long. In case you don't know, that's the grandfather of the symphonic band movement in Singapore. But then he also said, don't forget the missionary affiliations, the clan associations, the people who played. Now, it's not possible here, and I'll just digress a little bit. From the police band, or the Second Strait Settlement Police Band, on their off days, they would go and play music for funerals. And they would play Gilbert and Sullivan for funerals. So you'd be interested to know. I mean, they do a lot worse things these days, but you know, fascinating to find out that historically speaking, you know, any kind of music that sounded loud and sounded interesting, you know, take a pair of sparkling eyes. You imagine being sent off that way. Now, how about this for currency? Okay? Now, I can't give you the front page of this. I'll probably get arrested. Right? Yeah, this is a marching band. This is currency for the wind band in Singapore. And here is documentary evidence. There's a reason I marked it in red. Lai Jinxing did a project with me on third generation composers, two young composers who are now in schools, one of whom I think is doing his graduate study. Wong Kar Chun and Benjamin Yeo, who also teaches at ACS Independent. because they are published in banned publication, banned pieces across the United States. Okay, so the lesson in Lai Jinxing was, I now have to quote him. Okay, there is no such thing as a master pupil. There is a sense of continuity, however. And so there were powerful lessons that banned conference presentation had to do with acknowledging my own students' research. Thank you.
Are there any questions for Dr. Eugene?